Well, if the British do bolt, will we see the end of the EU as we know it? The former IMF official, Desmond Lachman, who says if the British leave, others will follow. Desmond, I always think of the old, you remember the old movies and the guy would have on a cheap suit and pull a thread and then the whole thing would fall apart? Is the UK potentially that thread for the EU? Once they're out, the whole thing collapses?
Well, it won't immediately collapse, but it'll certainly set that into motion, that what we've got in the rest of Europe is rather strong anti-Europe feeling if you look at places like Italy or France. And what they'll do is they'll see the British example and they'll be demanding referendums of their own so that in time this whole project could unravel if Britain were to leave.
So we're talking about the EU, going back to the Treaty of Rome, a European community. Initially, I think, based on the notion that together they'd have more economic might. So where does that leave the euro? I mean, ultimately, we're talking every country, not every country, but as more get out, the less effective the whole thing is. So that would that lead to the demise of the euro as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, that's really the threat right now, is that what we've had many years, it's now 8 years of really very poor economic performance. A lot of countries feel that they're stuck within the euro straitjacket that doesn't allow them to have their own monetary or exchange rate policy. And what they've had is they've had very high levels of unemployment and particularly high levels of youth unemployment that is now fanning a populist wave across these countries. So we are really talking about the euro as being under threat, but it's not something that would occur immediately. It's something that would occur within the space of a year or two. You know,
I understand, and I've watched this Euroscepticism over the last half dozen years explode to the point where Rome just elected a Eurosceptic and their first woman mayor. But what about the notion that these countries, no matter what this economic setup is, have some responsibility toward policies that actually trigger growth? I mean, you can't pay people 14 months of work for 12 months of work. You can't let people retire at 50 because they were a hairdresser working with hairspray. I mean, what about the notion that there's no magic elixir here? So it seems to me that they'd be going from one false promise to another.
Well, what they certainly have to do is they do have to get back fiscal discipline. They do have to control their budgets. But that is far easier to do outside of the euro than it is in the euro. What we've seen the past 8 years is countries like Greece and Portugal and Spain and Italy trying to tighten their budgets, but what they find is that that's counterproductive, because what it does is it leads to a deepening in their recessions. So the notion of getting out of Europe, getting out of the euro, is very attractive, because then you can do that budget adjustment and have a cheap currency that will promote exports, that will be an offset to the fiscal tightening.
Well, I don't know. We've seen a race to the bottom with respect to currencies around the world, and I think if you look at Japan for the last 20 years, the idea that you can print up a whole lot of money and have economic growth at the same time hasn't worked for one of the former world's greatest economies, and I don't think it would work for Greece, Portugal, or Spain. But I appreciate having you on. And
but it has worked. It has worked for the UK. The UK has had its cake and was allowed to eat it by having access to the single market and not being part of the euro.
Sure. Yeah, although London is a lot different than Athens, though. Thank you very much, sir. Really appreciate it.